Welcome to this explainer. If you've been looking around waiting for some massive, headline-grabbing wave of AI job losses to hit, well, you might be looking in the completely wrong place. Our source material today reveals a pretty startling observation. AI job displacement isn't some distant future event. It's actually an invisible reality happening right now. It's not just manifesting as huge layoffs. Instead, it's quietly unfolding through unannounced hiring freezes for entry-level knowledge work. The workforce just isn't growing where it used to. So today, we're breaking down exactly how this is happening, what it means for our economy, and how the architects of this technology are furiously spinning the narrative. Okay, let's dive into this. Here is our roadmap. First, we'll look at the job replacement pyramid. Second, the economic domino effect. Third, the robot workforce reality. And finally, the Silicon Valley spin. Let's get started.
Part 1. The job replacement pyramid.
Right off the bat, we need to address a major myth from our source material. Which jobs AI are actually going to replace first? There's a massive contrast between what the public thinks and the actual boots-on-the-ground vulnerability. If you ask the average person, they'd probably picture physical labor or factory workers, right? We've just been conditioned to think manual labor is the easiest thing to automate. But the data and observations from tech insiders tell a completely different story. If we break this down into a pyramid, the reality is literally inverted. At the bottom layer, you've got your blue-collar and manual workers. Think of a carpenter restoring a classic car. Contrary to popular belief, this bottom layer remains incredibly safe for now. There just isn't a robot that can dynamically restore a classic car yet. But then we have the middle tier, mundane knowledge work. Call center agents, assistants, entry-level financial analysts, paralegals. Basically, if your job involves sitting at a desk and clicking around on a computer all day, you are in the highly vulnerable category. You're facing an immediate threat because AI agents can now interface with computers exactly like we do. To put a hard number on this, Anthropic, one of the world's leading AI companies, has noted that roughly 15% of entry-level jobs can already be done by AI today. And this correlates perfectly with what executives are seeing on the ground. Businesses aren't necessarily firing 15% of their staff overnight. Instead, they're integrating AI and realizing, hey, one person with AI can now do the job of 4 people without it. This means the competition for entry-level desk jobs, the exact jobs so many of us started our careers with, is suddenly exponentially tighter. And this invisible shift is playing out on a very specific timeline. Over the past 2 years, companies have effectively enacted hiring freezes for entry-level roles. To a lot of people, it looked like a lack of job losses, but it was actually the invisible threat of a stagnant workforce. Looking forward, the source predicts that by 2027, we're going to see a very serious impact. And even if you're super optimistic, maybe it takes until 2030 for the broad, undeniable erosion of middle-tier knowledge jobs to hit. Moving to part 2, the end of labor arbitrage. Now, what's really interesting about this is how it affects the wider economy. To understand that, we first need to define a core concept: labor arbitrage. It's basically the capitalist practice of using labor and capital to create products at a lower cost than their selling price. You hire a team to make a pair of shoes, you pay them less than what those shoes eventually sell for, and you keep the difference. According to our source, this dynamic is the very foundation of our capitalist success. But this forces us to ask a pretty difficult question about how our entire economy functions. So what happens when that foundation just vanishes? Let's walk through this step by step. It's kind of a downward economic spiral. Step 1. The cost of labor drops to merely the cost of a machine, or for AI, the cost of compute and tokens. Step 2. Corporate investment shifts entirely away from human resources and directly into computing power. Step 3. Well, because humans are no longer earning those wages, workers lose their purchasing power. They can't buy the shoes or the services or the goods. And step 4. The overall GDP shrinks. We don't even need complete job displacement for this to happen. The source points out that at just 10 to 20% displacement, we find ourselves in a rapidly spiraling, totally different economy. The source actually raises some pretty grave concerns about what happens to a society when this shift accelerates. We're looking at the severe risk of hitting 20% unemployment right in the middle of periods of inflation. The speaker warns that governments need to wake up and potentially prepare for COVID-style government furloughs. Basically, paying people simply to stay home and survive while society figures out how to reskill them. Without that safety net, the source warns of deep societal fractures. Because when people feel their tax dollars don't benefit them and they're just left behind by the system, it paves the way for rising public anger and potential civil unrest. Part 3. The robot workforce reality.
Okay, so while we've focused heavily on software so far, we need to pivot to physical hardware. Because there is a massive disconnect in how the media covers robotics. We have the overhype, which is entirely focused on humanoid robots. Everyone wants to talk about machines that look and walk just like us. But the underhype, the actual, immediate, real-world disruption, is in specialized robots. A machine doesn't need to have 2 arms and 2 legs to completely take over a functional role.
10 billion. That means a world where robots actually outnumber humans? It sounds totally like science fiction, right? But this staggering prediction from Elon Musk, presented in our source, highlights a very real shift. While reaching that exact scale might seem a little far off, the transition to a non-human physical workforce is already heavily underway. It's just happening in different form factors.
And we have concrete proof of this right now. Look at Figure AI. They recently demonstrated a robot successfully sorting packages on a production line for 8 hours straight, completely autonomously. Or take autonomous cars, which, if you think about it, are essentially just specialized functional robots. BYD, the massive Chinese auto manufacturer, just announced they'll absorb the liability for accidents made by their autonomous vehicles. That signals immense confidence in the tech. And in the military, specialized machines like the Boston Dynamics dog are already being deployed on battlefields because they're infinitely more efficient at their specific tasks than a human. This hardware shift isn't coming, it's already here, all around us. Finally, part 4, the Silicon Valley spin. As these profound software and hardware shifts take place, we really have to look at the actual architects of this technology. Let's establish the baseline narrative that tech leaders pushed initially. Back in 2015, OpenAI founder Sam Altman plainly stated, "My job is to help people destroy jobs." He was completely candid about the fact that software was going to cause a level of job destruction that honestly no one was prepared for. And this brilliantly illustrates how firmly that aggressive narrative was held. Fast forward to 2023, and Altman was still holding firm, stating, quote, "Jobs are definitely going to go away, full stop." There was absolutely no sugarcoating it. The messaging coming out of Silicon Valley was absolute. But then, we see this sudden, stark inversion. In May of 2024, Altman completely changes his tune, stating, "I don't think we're going to have the kind of jobs apocalypse that some of the companies in our space advocate or talk about. My intuitions were just off." It is such a bizarre and dramatic shift in the PR script. I mean, how do you go from "jobs are going away full stop" to "my intuitions were just off" in barely a year? Well, the source offers a really compelling theory for this sudden flip. It's a PR problem. You see, years ago, the incentive for these AI companies was to be taken seriously. They needed to scare the public and investors into realizing exactly how powerful this technology was. Well, congratulations, it worked. But now that they are taken seriously, the resulting fear is actually bad for business. People are booing at commencement speeches, there are attacks on data centers, and voters are rallying behind politicians who are theoretically anti-AI. The fear they engineered is now threatening their bottom line. So the script literally had to change to, "Don't worry, everything is going to be perfectly fine." Because these tech leaders are reading from newly polished PR scripts, our source argues that we absolutely must judge these giants by their actions, not their words. Take this stark contrast presented in the material. Anthropic recently rejected a deal involving human targeting and surveillance, effectively choosing to lose out on a $500 million contract just to stand by their ethics. Shortly after, OpenAI reportedly accepted that exact same contract. It's a crystal clear demonstration of actions over words and how some players prioritize capital over their publicly stated principles. So the crucial point is this. As this invisible disruption continues to rewrite our economy, the nature of labor, and our physical world, we just can't rely on press releases to understand what's coming next. We have to ask ourselves this provocative question drawn directly from our source material. Who is actually behaving in a way that makes AI work for humanity, and who is just making it work for their shareholders? Keep your eyes on the actions, not the spin. Thanks for joining me for this explainer, and I'll catch you next time.